The shortcut. Sam had just finished his engineering degree and landed his first job as a site supervisor at a construction project in a province not far from Bangkok. His girlfriend, Nina, worked as an accountant at a company nearby, and the two of them were renting a room in the company dormitory to save money. They only had to pay for water and electricity, which suited them perfectly since they had just started out, and every beat counted. Despite being settled enough for a young couple, Sam still had the habits of someone who hadn't quite finished being 20. After his shift ended at 5 in the afternoon, he would often take his motorcycle out to visit his old friend Ben, who lived in a different district about 30 kilometers away. There were two routes between his workplace and Ben's house, and Sam had a strong preference for the shorter one. It was a narrow concrete road that cut through a stretch of undeveloped land and came out almost directly near Ben's place, saving him roughly 5 minutes of riding. The locals in that area almost never used this shortcut after dark because there were no streetlights at all, and the dense trees and overgrown brush pressed in tightly on both sides of the road. There was also the matter of its reputation. People who lived nearby would mention, without making too much of it, that the road had a history of trouble. Years before, someone had planned to develop a housing estate along this corridor. An economic crisis had killed the project before a single house was built, leaving only the concrete lane stretching through what had gradually become a kind of unofficial forest. On top of that, the road had been used more than once as a dumping ground for bodies after robberies and motorbike thefts in the area. It was the sort of road where you kept your eyes straight ahead and your throttle open. Sam used it anyway. He reasoned that the time savings added up and the fuel savings were real. For the most part, he rode through quickly enough that the atmosphere didn't have time to bother him. The road had exactly one inhabited point along its entire length, a single traditional tire wooden house raised on low stilts. It stood at a Z-shaped bend near where the shortcut rejoined the main road, perhaps 50 meters before the junction. The house belonged to an elderly couple, a grandfather and a grandmother. Sam saw them almost every time he rode past. When he came through during daylight on his way to Ben's house, they were usually there. When he came back at night around 8 o'clock, they were still there. They sat on the front veranda under an amber fluorescent light that glowed warmly in the darkness. After months of riding past the same veranda, Sam had fallen into the habit of nodding and smiling at them as he went by. It was a small acknowledgement between neighbors who had never actually spoken. He had also quietly noticed over those same months that he never once saw anyone else at the house. No children, no grandchildren, no relatives dropping by on weekends. Just the two of them, always sitting in the same spots, always watching the road. Then came the night. It rained. Sam had left Ben's house at his usual time, but the weather turned on him before he was halfway home. The motorcycle he was riding was an older model with a temperamental engine that stalled in heavy rain. When the sky opened up that night, Sam knew immediately that he wasn't going to make it back to the dormitory without stopping. He scanned the road ahead and saw the amber light glowing through the downpour. He turned his motorcycle into the gate of the old couple's house without hesitating. He parked under the eave and jogged up the wooden steps. He bowed to them with both hands pressed together and said he was sorry to intrude and could he please wait out the rain for a little while. The grandfather smiled immediately and told him to make himself at home. He disappeared into the house and came back with a tin cup of water for him to drink. Sam took it with both hands and thanked him. He settled himself on the edge of the veranda and made small talk, the way young people do with strangers who are older and seemingly kind. He asked her to answer him and said, yes, just the two of them. It had been just the two of them for a long time now. Sam took that in and assumed the obvious. Children who had moved away, perhaps a family that had drifted apart the way families sometimes do. He changed the subject because it seemed rude to press it. He let his eyes drift around the veranda and into what he could see of the interior through the open door. That was when he noticed that all the windows in the house were open despite the rain. Not just slightly open, but fully open. Several of them appeared to have been forced, their frames hanging at wrong angles, as though someone had pushed through them rather than unlatched them properly. The house inside was completely empty of furniture. There was nothing. No wardrobe, no table, no chair, nothing. Just bare wooden floor stretching back to windows that should have been closed against the storm. Sam remarked on the windows, asking gently whether they had been broken into. The grandfather nodded and said Yes, they had. Someone had forced the house. Sam sat with that for a moment and began to understand why the house looked the way it did. Stripped, emptied, left with nothing worth taking. He felt a quiet sadness for the old couple and made an offer without thinking too much about it. It was the kind of offer that comes from wanting to be useful. He was a foreman, he said. He knew how to fix things. If they didn't mind, he would come back on a day off and repair the windows and the doors for them at no charge. It would be as a trade for the shelter they had given him tonight and the cup of water. The grandmother clasped her hands together and bowed to him, asking how much he wanted for labor. He waved the question away. He had said the words, and he meant them. What happened next was the thing Sam would spend 19 years trying to fully account for. The rain was still heavy and the night was dark, and then lightning struck somewhere close enough to bleach the sky white for a full second. In that second, Sam was looking directly at the grandmother. She was sitting in the same spot she had been sitting in the entire time. Through her body caught in the white light of the lightning flash, Sam could see the trees beyond the veranda moving in the storm wind. He was looking through her as though she were made of frosted glass. The image lasted less than a breath. Then the darkness came back, and the amber light came back, and the grandmother was sitting there as she always had been. Sam felt his body stiffen. He stayed very still and told himself his eyes had played a trick on him in the lightning, that it was just the flash, that the mind makes mistakes in extreme light. He sat with both hands on his knees and stared at the planks of the veranda floor and didn't look up. A few minutes passed. The grandmother spoke. She asked in a voice that was perfectly ordinary and conversational whether the young man was frightened. Sam took a breath and said, no, he wasn't frightened at all. It was not true, but he said it shortly after the rain eased. Sam stood. He pressed his hands together in a bow. He thanked them both. He walked down the steps to his motorcycle. As he was kick-starting the engine, he heard the grandmother's voice call out from behind him, clear and unhurried. "Come back and look after the house for us sometime, won't you?" Sam did not turn around. He fixed his attention on the road and rode back to the dormitory as quickly as the wet concrete allowed. He told Nina everything when he got home. He lay awake for most of the night with those words cycling through his head. Come back and look after the house. And a feeling he couldn't name sitting heavy in his chest like something left unfinished. The lottery. In the morning, Sam called Ben and asked if he knew anything about the wooden house at the bend in the shortcut road. Ben said of course he knew the house. It had been empty for years. Everyone in the area knew it was abandoned. Sam went quiet on the other end of the line. Ben asked if something had happened. Sam said yes, something had happened last night. He told Ben about the rain and the shelter and what he had seen in the lightning flash. Ben listened without saying anything for a while. Then he said the thing Sam had half been hoping not to hear. "Don't tell me you saw a ghost." Sam said yes, that was what he was saying. Ben told him to come over that Sunday. They would go to the house together. He would help Sam fix the windows and doors the way Sam had promised the old couple. They would see what they would see. Sam spent the rest of the week wrestling with the feeling that he had made a commitment to something, even though the two people he had made it to had turned out not to be people in any ordinary sense. On Sunday morning, he went to a hardware shop and bought hinges, door fittings, padlocks, and other supplies. Then he rode to Ben's house and picked him up. The two of them drove to the old house in Ben's pickup truck. Riding past the house on the way to Ben's, as Sam always did out of habit, he saw the house from the road. He confirmed what he had half known since the night of the rain. It was empty, and clearly had been for a long time, but he had ridden past it hundreds of times before that night and always seen the two old figures sitting on the veranda. He always returned their nods. He always felt the amber light as a kind of landmark in an otherwise dark and empty road. He had felt safe near that house. He had felt watched over. When they arrived and walked inside, the interior was exactly as he had described to Ben. It was stripped bare, not a single piece of furniture. Windows were broken open at their hinges, the air of a place that had been abandoned for longer than the neighbors could quite remember. The two of them worked through the morning and into the afternoon, fixing what could be fixed. They rehung the windows. They replaced the broken hardware. They fitted a combination padlock on the front door. Before leaving, Sam lit 3 sticks of incense and stood them in a gap in the floorboards. He bowed quietly. He had brought the padlock as a practical gesture. He left the combination, a number he chose more or less at random, scratched into one of the wooden support posts near the door so that whoever the house belonged to would be able to find it. He and Ben got back in the truck. That, Sam told himself, was that. He had kept his word. A few days before the next lottery draw, Ben called him and said, "You should buy tickets with the padlock number." Sam thought about it and bought 2. The vendor wouldn't sell him a single one, only pairs. On the evening of the draw, Ben called again, barely able to speak, and said, "We got it." The number had come out. 3 digits, exact match. Sam stood in the parking lot of the construction site and laughed because he didn't know what else to do. He called Nina and told her. She told him to check his tickets before celebrating because he hadn't checked yet. He said he would check when he got back to the office where his laptop was. He rode to the office. He pulled the 2 tickets out from under his seat. He logged into the lottery website. He checked the first ticket, then the second. He sat for a long time in front of the screen. Both tickets were first prize. When he told her, she also immediately said that from now on, he should find a different route to Ben's house and stop using the shortcut entirely. Sam agreed with his mouth, but not entirely with his mind. He kept thinking about the grandmother's parting words. He kept thinking about the number he had scratched into the post. He kept thinking about the way the 2 tickets had been sitting under his motorcycle seat for 3 days without him thinking to check them. After he collected the winnings and the paperwork was done, he told Nina that what he wanted to do. What he had been thinking about since the night of the rain was to find out who owned that plot of land and offer to buy it. Nina looked at him. She reminded him that the house was haunted. He said he knew. She pointed out that no sensible person builds their home on a haunted property. He said he understood that. But the grandmother's words kept floating up in him like something that needed answering. He had decided that what she had meant by looking after the house was exactly what she had said. To come and live there and to be the person who kept the property and cared for it. He wanted to try. On the following Sunday, he rode to the property on his own. He walked around the outside first, then through the gate and around the back. Behind the house, past the overgrown garden of small and large trees, there was a wide pond. Standing at the edge of the pond, Sam did the mental arithmetic of renovation and landscaping and decided it would cost a lot of money. But he had a lot of money now. He turned to walk back and heard a woman's voice not far away, coming from the direction of the tamarind tree on the far side of the pond. "Help me." He stopped walking. He stood still and listened to make sure he had heard it. Then it came again, clearer the second time. "Please help me." Sam turned toward the sound. On the other side of the pond, near the tamarind tree, a tree wide enough that 2 people could barely join their arms around its trunk, a young woman had emerged, not stepped out from behind the tree. She had come out of the tree, her upper body and head extending from the bark as though the tree had grown her as a branch, and she was looking across the water directly at him. She was pale, soaking wet, despite the dry weather, wearing a white lace blouse, and her face was the face of someone young. 17, perhaps 18, perhaps 20. It was hard to say. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read, but couldn't look away from either. The first thought that entered Sam's head, and he would repeat this to himself and others for years afterward with some embarrassment, was that she was the most beautiful ghost he had ever seen, as though he had a basis for comparison. He stood at the edge of the pond and looked at her. She raised one hand and beckoned to him. "Can you see me?" At those words, something in Sam's body reasserted itself. He called back across the water that yes, he could see her, and that he would come back to help. Then he ran. He ran to his motorcycle and rode back to the dormitory. He told Nina everything, including the part about calling back to the ghost, that he would return, which Nina found both bewildering and entirely typical. She agreed to come with him the following Sunday on the condition that they go in the daytime. She spent the intervening week preparing a votive set, flowers, incense, gold leaf candles, with an investment of attention that suggested she was no longer entirely opposed to the project. The tamarind tree. The following Sunday, Sam and Nina rode to the property together, Nina sitting behind him with a plastic bag of offerings on her lap, commenting the whole way that the place looked frightening and she couldn't understand why anyone would want to build a house here. Sam walked her straight to the tamarind tree. The tree was enormous at its base, its trunk worn smooth on one side as if someone had stripped the bark away years ago, and in that smooth face someone had carved words, or tried to. Time and the growth of the wood had stretched and distorted the carving until most of it was unreadable. The letters swollen at their edges, blurred by decades of the tree simply continuing to exist. Sam and Nina circled the trunk and couldn't make sense of most of it, but at the very end of the inscription, the last syllable of whatever had been written there, the carving was still legible. It read, Tima. They stood looking at it. Nina said it was probably a name, Sam agreed, or part of a name. They lit the incense together. They stood the sticks in the earth at the foot of the tree, and Sam spoke aloud into the air between the branches. I've come back the way I said I would. I don't know what you need help with. But if you can make it known somehow, I'll try to understand and do what I can. After that, they walked back through the property and out to the road. Sam had already decided what to do about the ownership question, but wasn't sure how to begin. He spent weeks asking neighbors and anyone else who lived near the shortcut whether they knew who owned the land. And nobody could tell him anything that led anywhere. No one had ever seen an owner visit the property. No one knew who held the title after a month with no answers. Sam made a large sign from a sheet of plywood, roughly 1/2 meter by 2 meters, and nailed it to the fence at the front of the property. He put his name and phone number and the words, I wish to purchase this land. Please contact me. Nothing happened for another month. Eventually, Sam asked Ben to help him look into it. Ben came back with something unexpected. The registered owners of the property were the elderly couple themselves, the same grandfather and grandmother that Sam had sheltered with on the night of the rain. The land was not 3 or 4 plots around the house. It was 100 rai on both sides of the shortcut road, spanning the entire stretch that Sam had been riding through every time he took the short route to Ben's place. He had been riding through their land for over a year. Without knowing it, Sam tried to think through the implications of this and found himself mostly just sitting quietly with the strangeness of it. With no direct way to contact the registered owners, he made one more decision. He got back on his motorcycle and rode to the house with the fancy gate that he had ended up in front of on that strange evening months ago, the house in the dead-end lane where he had stood on someone's front path and inexplicably said to a woman he had never met, "Why don't you go home to visit your parents more often?" The woman had gone inside without answering him. He had never been able to explain why he had said it. Nina was the one who had made the connection casually, in the middle of a conversation about how to find the landowner. She had asked him whether he had ever thought to go back and ask. He had not thought about that woman once in the intervening weeks. The suggestion arrived like something obvious that had been quietly waiting for him. He rang the bell at the gate, and this time a man in his 50s came out, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, the manner of someone who ran things. Sam explained that he was looking for the owner of the land near the tamarind tree and asked if the woman of the house was related to that property. The man said wait and went inside, and a minute later a woman came out. Sam would later learn she was in her early 60s, though she carried herself younger. He asked his question again, and she said yes, she was the daughter of the people who had owned that property. Sam said that he had been fortunate enough to meet her parents once, and he told her the story of the night in the rain. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked him what he wanted. Sam told her he wanted to buy the land, specifically the 3 rai that contained the house and the garden and the pond. He offered her 2 million baht before she could name a price. He framed it as it has been sitting empty and earning nothing, and here is someone willing to take care of it. She told him flatly that she had no intention of selling. He offered 3 million. Nina, standing beside him, looked at him sharply. Aunt Juan, which was what Sam would come to call her, repeated that no amount of money was the point. She wanted to keep it the way it was. Sam sat with this for a moment and then said the thing that had been sitting at the back of his throat since the beginning. He said that the reason he wanted the land was because her mother had asked him to come back and look after the house. He added that if Aunt Juan wasn't going to sell it to him, he supposed he wouldn't be able to keep that promise. He said it plainly, not as a manipulation, just as a fact. Aunt Juan went quiet. She asked him to repeat it. He repeated it. She sat with it for a long moment and then asked him one question. If she sold him the land, would he tear down the old house? He said no. He would renovate it. He would keep it standing. Her expression shifted. She asked whether he could promise her that. He said he could. She agreed to sell it $3 million with two conditions. She could visit the house whenever she wished. If he ever decided to sell the land on, he had to give her the right to buy it back first. Sam agreed to both conditions without hesitation. The paperwork was completed over the following weeks. Sam began the renovation and construction with a combination of practical excitement and superstitious care that the situation seemed to call for. He worked on the old wooden house first, shoring up the floor, replacing the damaged timber, repainting the boards, making it habitable again. He then built a new house for himself and Nina on the land behind it. The old house stood separately near the entrance to the property, like a guardian at the front. Nina had gone from not wanting to live there at all to throwing herself into the planning with considerable enthusiasm once the purchase was final. She was pregnant by the time the construction was done. The tin box. They moved in during the last weeks of Nina's pregnancy, and everything Sam looked at seemed to confirm that he had made the right choices. He had 12 million baht, a house of his own, a child on the way, and a piece of land that had in some way he couldn't fully explain but also couldn't deny come to him as the result of a night in the rain and a pair of lottery tickets. He had told Nina about the inscription on the tamarind tree, the partial word Tima, and they had talked about it on the drive back from the tree that afternoon, tossing possible names back and forth across the motorcycle helmet. What name could contain those two syllables and sound like the name of a daughter? Sam found himself thinking of a girl he had known in secondary school whose name was Netima, and the two of them looked at each other and didn't need to say anything more. When their daughter was born, they named her Netima and called her Nettie for short. Aunt Juan came to see the baby and brought gifts. Sam offered her tea and walked her through the renovated house, which she stood in for a long time without saying anything, touching the door frames and window latches with her fingertips, and then said that he had done a good job. It looked exactly as it should. After that, she began to visit more regularly, always bringing something for Nettie. A toy, a sweet, a length of fabric, and Sam noticed that she and the baby had a rapport that developed faster than seemed entirely normal. Nettie was not a shy child, but most small children took time to warm to strangers. With Aunt Juan, there was no warming period. From the very first visit, after the baby was old enough to be aware of who was in the room, Nettie would look at her with calm recognition. The family settled into its routines. Sam continued at the construction site and was given more responsibility as his experience grew. Nina stayed home with Nettie, though she was dealing with a chronic health condition that required regular hospital visits. A factory had gone up on the land adjacent to theirs. The owner had been building it during the same period Sam was putting up his house, and the pile driving had been a noise Sam had quietly endured for several months. One afternoon, a car pulled up in front of Sam's gate, and a man got out who introduced himself as the owner of the new factory. He was perhaps 40, well-presented, and he had come to apologize for the construction noise and to introduce himself as a neighbor. Sam brought him inside. Nina made tea, and they sat and talked in the front room. The factory owner, Sam would come to call him Kun Dech, was pleasant and asked the kinds of questions neighbors ask. How long had they been here? Was it just the two of them? Had they built the house themselves? Then he steered toward what he had actually come to say, which was that he wanted to buy the property. He named a figure. Nina's eyes went wide. Sam declined without discussion. Kundek looked genuinely disappointed and left his contact details in case Sam ever changed his mind, then asked to be shown around before he left. Sam walked him out to the old house, and Kundek stood in front of it and said something that stopped Sam completely. "I haven't been back here in a long time. You've kept it looking the same as it was." Sam waited for him to explain what that meant, but Kundek said nothing more, only nodded, as if satisfied with something private, and got back in his car. Sam thought about it afterward and decided that Kundek must have been one of the people who had once received good fortune from the house, as he himself had. He filed it away and moved on. Life at the house was good, but not entirely untroubled. Nina's health was the ongoing difficulty. Sam felt the guilt of someone who worked long hours and came home to a wife who was managing a child in a medical condition. He arrived home at 6 o'clock. He called out for Nina and heard her answering from the kitchen. He walked through the front room and noticed the television was on, a children's cartoon. But Nettie, who was just 3, was not sitting in front of it. He went back and asked Nina where the baby was. Nina said she was right there watching television, wasn't she? They searched the house quickly and didn't find her. They searched the yard, calling her name. Sam ran to the pond first because that was the thing he feared most. She was not at the pond. Nina ran to the front, and Sam ran around the back. They found her at the old house. She had come out from under the stilts, pushing herself on her hands and knees through the gap under the raised floor. She was holding something in both arms. A tin box, gray with age, its surface decorated with the embossed outlines of a phoenix and a dragon facing each other across the lid. Nettie ran to Sam when she saw him and held the box up. "Daddy, I found a treasure box." Sam picked her up and held her and tried to breathe normally again while Nina stood a few feet away with her hand pressed to her chest. He asked Nettie how she had gotten outside. She said the grandmother opened the door for me. Sam asked, "Which grandmother?" She said, "Grandmother, the one who lives here." The front door of the old house had been locked with a combination padlock. Later, Sam asked Nina whether she had left it unlocked. Nina said no. She had checked it that morning. It was locked. He took the box inside, and eventually, with patience and a combination of household lubricants, managed to force the lid. Inside were pieces of antique jewelry, 20 or more of them. Rings, earrings, bracelets, chains, a silver belt buckle, a gold pendant, the kind of ornaments worn by a woman of means in an earlier era. Sam and Nina turned them over in their hands and couldn't decide whether they were real or reproduction. The weight and patina of them suggested the former. Sam put the box back together and placed it on the shelf in the bedroom, deciding that the right thing to do would eventually become clear. Nettie had fallen silent the moment Sam suggested returning the box to whoever it belonged to. She had been sitting on Nina's lap holding one of the bracelets. At his words, she had turned and said with perfect composure, "I won't give it back." Not loudly, not in a tantrum, just as a statement. Then, when she said, in a register that Nina would later tell Sam she had never heard from a 3-year-old and had no explanation for, "It's mine." Nina spent the next few days watching Nettie carefully for any further signs of the same quality. But the child went back to being exactly herself, cheerful, active, normal in every observable way. Sam kept the box and decided not to force the issue yet. He believed that the story had more to tell him before he would know what to do.